Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamu alaikum. Our today's topic is about permanent dipole PD and induced dipole ID. Now let's dive in a topic. Permanent dipole. When two elements with different electronegativities form a covalent bond, this bond will be polar. For example, HCl. The bond formed between hydrogen and chlorine is polar covalent bond because their electronegativity values are different. The electronegativity of hydrogen is 2.20 and electronegativity of chlorine is 3.16. This causes the atoms sharing the electrons to have partial charges because one is pulling the electrons to itself a little more. When two such molecules come close together, an attraction between those partial charges occurs. For example, the bond between hydrogen and chlorine is polar because chlorine has higher electronegativity than hydrogen. This means that when bound, chlorine has a partial negative charge and hydrogen has a partial positive charge. The opposing partial charges on these molecules can interact with one another. This is a PD-PD interaction or permanent dipole interaction. The electronegativity of chlorine is greater than hydrogen, so partial negative charge is formed on chlorine atom and partial positive charge form is on hydrogen atom. So it's a polar covalent bond formed between hydrogen and chlorine. When two such molecules come close together, an attraction between those partial charges occur. Here, two molecules come close together, so an attraction formed between this partially negative charged chlorine and partial positive charged hydrogen. It is a PD-PD interaction. Permanent dipole and induced dipole PD-ID interaction. When a permanent dipole is in close proximity to a molecule without any polar bonds, it is possible for the permanent dipole to induce a dipole across the non-polar covalent bond in the another molecule. For example, the OH bond in water is polar because the electronegativity of oxygen is greater than hydrogen. The electronegativity of oxygen is 3.44 and the electronegativity of hydrogen is 2.20. So, polar bond is formed between oxygen and hydrogen. Therefore, it has a permanent dipole. When water approaches a molecule with a non-polar CH bond, the partially charged oxygen atom can induce a dipole to form on this CH bond. This is called a PD-ID interaction or permanent dipole and induced dipole interaction. The PD-ID interactions are weaker than PD-PD interaction. The partially charged oxygen atom induce this molecule, and PDID interaction is formed between these two molecules. Induced dipole. It is also known as London dispersion forces. It occurs between two molecules with non-polar bonds. Since electrons fluctuate, temporary asymmetrical distributions of electrons can generate partial charges on the atoms involved in the non-polar covalent bond. This is the weakest intermolecule interaction. The molecule with the partial charge can induce a dipole on its neighbor. For example, the bond between two chlorine atoms is nonpolar since they have the exact same electronegativity. However, one of the two chlorines may become temporarily partially charged, affecting the Cl2 molecule next to it. This temporary attractive forces is the induced dipole interaction or ID-ID interaction. This temporary attractive force is the ID-ID interaction. It is the ID-ID or induced dipole interaction. Now the strength comparison. Covalent bond is the strongest, then ionic, then ion and permanent dipole, permanent dipole, permanent dipole, permanent dipole and induced dipole, and the weakest bond is induced dipole or ID-ID interaction. Now dua for success. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Rabbi adkhilni mudkhala sidqin wa akhrijni mukhraja sidqin waj'alni min ladunka sultanan nasira. Translation. My Lord, cause me to enter a sound entrance and to exit a sound exit, and grant me from yourself a supporting authority. Thank you very much. Allah Hafiz.